All right, welcome to the video lecture on chapter 12. This chapter deals with crimes against public order and moral order. So a lot of times these are called quality of life crimes. I'm going to go ahead and note that this recording will probably be fairly short. In class, I generally don't spend a ton of time on this chapter, so that will probably come through on the video as well. Now, one of the largest groups of crimes under this heading of like quality of life is disorderly conduct. Disorderly conduct is a common law crime that was called breach of the peace, and we still use this crime. And it is oftentimes the most common interaction for individuals with the criminal justice system and with police officers. So first things first, disorderly conducts are offenses against public order and morals. They are almost always misdemeanor. Disorderly conducts are misdemeanors. They are punishable by a year or less in prison and relatively small fines. Sometimes people get a few days in jail, but that's not typically the common punishment for disorderly conduct. So when we talk about disorderly conduct, the Model Penal Code defines the actus reus of disorderly conduct in 3 categories. Fighting in public, which is the most common reason why someone's charged with the disorderly conduct, is getting into a fight. Oftentimes they're intoxicated, they're at a bar, or they're at like an outdoor event and they get into a fight with somebody. The second actus reus for this offense is unreasonable noise or abusive language. So this is violating kind of like curfew on sound, or running around using words that you're not supposed to use in public and you get reported to the police. And then the last actus reus is creating a hazardous or physically offensive condition. This is usually setting off a stink bomb in a public place, turning off the lights in a public venue, strewing garbage across your neighbor's grass to get back at them. Those types of things would qualify under that hazardous or physically offensive condition. Now, there are some special types of disorderly conducts as well that states usually define a little separately from just the general crime. And those include setting off a false public alarm, so like pulling a fire alarm when there's not actually a fire. Public drunkenness is a form of disorderly conduct. Being out in public while you're drunk and not listening or obeying the rules. Loitering or prowling can be a form of disorderly conduct. This is because you frighten other people with your behavior usually. Obstructing highways or other public passages is a type of disorderly conduct, and disrupting meetings and processions is a type of disorderly conduct as well. The mens rea differs here. So we have everything covered from reckless to purposeful. So disorderly conducts are not usually negligent. They could be though, but so we have a broad spectrum. It really depends on the harm, and if you're being charged with just like a straight disorderly conduct, one of those specialized forms. But by far the most common use of disorderly conduct is a ban on fighting in public. All right. So a lot of these quality of life crimes are kind of based on broken windows theory. This is kind of problematic because broken windows theory has a lot of problems with it, but it has influenced laws and legislation. So the next crime here is vagrancy and loitering. This has been a crime for 600 years. Vagrancy looks at poor people wandering with no visible means of support. Obviously, there can be some problems here. What does someone with no visible means of support actually look like? So this can be a place where some bias comes into how and who this is enforced against. And if we think back to the entrapment, way back when chapter 6, I think when we talk about entrapment, there was an officer that went undercover and faked being homeless. So again, that kind of reinforces that who and how can be problematic here. Loitering is the crime of remaining in one place with no apparent purpose. If we think back to that entrapment case, he was loitering in a public park when he wasn't supposed to be. So that was kind of the whole foundation of the setup for the entrapment. So these can be problematic. The Supreme Court in 1972 struck down the common vagrancy statute because it was vague. And it encouraged arbitrary law enforcement. So these have to be very carefully written to capture a very specific behavior and put the public on notice about what these crimes actually mean. Yeah, so struck down. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Supreme Court also tightened the restrictions on what loitering means, again, because they were too vague, they were not providing notice. And if we think way back to the very first chapter, those are some first and second chapters, those are some really important restrictions on criminal law, is that they provide notice. So our next quality of life crime is panhandling. This is the act of begging for money or food. And this is, these are usually written to require that you stop somebody on the street. And so this kind of exempts charities and other organizations that regularly ask for money, ask for donations. So panhandling can violate, you cannot completely outlaw panhandling because panhandling is a type of speech that's protected under the First Amendment. So you cannot outlaw panhandling, but what you can do is regulate where it takes place. So you can say that panhandling is not acceptable in certain venues. In other words, you can enforce time, place, and manner regulation. So you, as long as you leave open some times, places, and manners for panhandling to occur, you're not violating the individual's First Amendment rights, but you cannot completely outlaw it. All right, and when I say time, place, and manner, I mean that the regulations are not based on the content of the speech, which is why you can't outlaw panhandling. You can't say you're not allowed to beg. The regulation serves a significant government interest and leaves open other channels of expression. So that's what time, place, and manner regulations mean. Now, our next chunk here is gang activity. So criminal law has attempted to respond to gang activity by, because obviously it's super dangerous and problematic. They've tried to regulate gang behavior. It's a crime to join it, participate in a gang. There's more harsh, there's stiffer punishments involved for committing a crime with a gang. You can't encourage a minor to join a gang. RICO, organized crime statutes have been applied to gang activity, and it's been banned from certain public places. But as noted in the City of Chicago v. Morales case, there can be problems with this. In Chicago made it an ordinance that prohibited criminal street gang members from loitering with one another in any public place. And the Supreme Court struck that down as void for vagueness. It did not put enough, it did not give enough notice to people what they can and cannot do. So criminal law struggles to capture and adequately punish gang activity, and furthermore to kind of prevent it before it occurs. So more and more places in our country have turned to civil law to deal with gang activity. And the primary method of doing that is to get an injunction. So an injunction seeks restraining orders to bar gang members from certain gang activities. And so these have been fairly effective. Your book has an example, City of St. Paul versus East Side Boys and Selby Siders. And the injunction just lists out a series of things that cannot be done. And if they do so, they're violating civil law. So the punishment would not be jail, but there would be a harsh financial punishment involved. And these have been fairly effective at dealing with gang activity in the communities that have gone this route. All right. Now, your book has a section on violent video games, in part because of Columbine and Sandy Hook have led to the passage of ordinances kind of limiting video games. The research out there is inconclusive, but there is some suggestion in the research that more time spent playing violent video games does increase aggression. So the question is kind of how should we deal with that if we want to prevent tragedies. But this is a really developing area of the law. Now the last part of this chapter deals with victimless crimes. Victimless crimes, one of the most common ones is prostitution. So we need at least two people. The prostitute provides the service, the client who engages in the service, and there's frequently the John or the pimp involved as well. Prostitution laws sometimes run into trouble because they don't punish the parties equally, that frequently the prostitute gets a much harsher punishment. There's three types, so we need more equal enforcement involved. And there's three types of statutes that one punishes the prostitute but not the John, punish both, but the prostitute more severely. But the shift has been to start punishing both parties, the prostitute and the John, more equally, because it can violate equal protection. So in your book kind of notes the kind of arrests, we're significantly arresting many more females than males, and despite the fact that we require two parties for it to be an act of prostitution. So local governments have responded to this by targeting Johns by forfeiting their cars. In some places, and the car is just gone, it's often sold, and then some places are revoking driver's licenses. And then we also have seen some areas engage in public shaming by publishing the names in media of the person who was soliciting or engaging in sex. So then your book also notes that with a lot of these more minor crimes, it's a question of public order versus an income source for the city and whether that's okay or not. So you can definitely look that over on your own. So let me know if you have any questions about this chapter. I think the biggest things to focus on are disorderly conduct and what disorderly conduct is, prostitution and the problems with enforcing prostitution, as well as the definitions for vagrancy, loitering, and panhandling. Let me know if you have any questions. I look forward to working with you.